Thank you, Donald, and good evening. Well, after the tragedy and the sadness, today has been a very odd, a very strange day. A day after which the Prime Minister has raised the threat level from critical to severe, and we have the army. We have soldiers in military uniform in Downing Street. We're told that major sporting fixtures will see armed soldiers. And let me tell you something really very odd about today and about the last 48 hours. That we've learnt more about Salman Abedi. In fact, we've learnt his name. We've learnt the fact that he went to Syria. We've learnt more about his family from American intelligence and from French intelligence than we have from British intelligence. And just in the last hour or so, the New York Times have published a whole series of pictures, even showing the actual bomb itself. Now, I was asking this question this morning on Twitter. I was accused by a Tory MP of threatening national security. And I do understand that there's been a big network today in Manchester, in London. There are several arrests that have taken place. They're looking for the links that Abedi had with other people, and clearly they're finding them, which is good. But if all this stuff is absolutely secret and critical and should not be in the public domain because otherwise it might hinder arresting other people, why on earth are they telling the French and German intelligence services all this information who are now releasing it to us? That I find difficult to understand. What we also get is from the Didsbury Mosque, from some of the preachers at the Didsbury Mosque, telling us that Abedi really scared them. He was talking about suicide bombing being a noble route out. Indeed, some of his neighbours said the same thing, that this young man was displaying increasingly bad, worrying behaviour. So he was known to the authorities. He'd befriended somebody on Moss side who was known as a recruiting officer for ISIS. The authorities knew who this man was, and yet he wasn't on the list. Yep, there is a list. There is a list of nearly 3,500 people who are suspected potential terrorists living in this country. And yet this man, despite all we knew about him, wasn't on it. So one wonders how big the list in reality really is. Perhaps it really is 10,000. I don't know. But for the purposes of this discussion, given that we know the identities of 3,500 people who've got links to radical Islam, who've got links to ISIS, who've got links to extremism, and who pose a threat to our way of life, what should we do with those 3,500 known jihadis in this country already? I want to know from you what you think we ought to do in the face of something that clearly is a very grave situation indeed. Let me know what you think. Call me on 0345 6060 973. Text me on 84850. You can tweet me at LBC, not forgetting the hashtag Farage and LBC. And of course, you can watch the show live by going to LBC's Facebook page. Now, Mohammed in Birmingham, I'm going to you as my first caller. There are nearly 3,500 people that we absolutely know have links to really bad people across the world. How on earth should we deal with them?
Hi, can I just say, right, in order to understand the problem that we have here, is to speak to apostates of Islam if you want to truly understand what's happening. I am an apostate of Islam.
Are you? Okay.
Now,
so have you given up on Islam or converted to Christianity? I mean, what's your situation?
I initially turned away from Islam because I know what it teaches. And then, along the way, I found Christ. So it wasn't a switch from one to the other. I just turned away from Islam because I did not accept the things that were in there.
Is that, Mohammed, I'm sorry to stop you because I know you've got a story to tell and I want to hear it. Just very quickly, is that because of the religion itself, in your view, or the way in which it was interpreted and taught to you?
Now, if you speak to anyone that's turned away from Islam, they will tell you exactly the same why we have turned away. Millions are turning away from it because the ideology itself is offensive. It's not. You will not find the word love in the Quran, right? As you know, Muhammad, when he first started, he was a peaceful person. Right?
Yes.
But as soon as he went strong, he had an army, he then went on the offensive. That is a problem. The Quran itself is prescriptive. You have to obey it. That's the problem. And you cannot, you can't change it. You can't. And this is a problem. The other problem is, right, when the British allowed these people into Britain, what happens is this. A Pakistani community has got anti-British attitudes anyway. When I speak to them, they don't know that I am an apostate. When I engage with them and I ask them about the questions of the French attacks, they say that wasn't us, that was MI5. The attacks in the tube attacks, that wasn't us, that was MI5. So you got this deluded.
This is rather like Mohammed, the 9/11 stuff, isn't it? I'm told that some of the extreme preaching tells people that 9/11 wasn't radical Islam. It was actually the American state that conducted this stuff.
Or the Jews.
Or the Jews, yeah.
Now, here's the thing, right? When we allow these people into our community that is already here, because the British authorities think we can put these people into the Islamic communities that are already here because they will feel at home. That's a big mistake, because what's happening is when these people come into the Islamic communities here, the Islamic communities here are telling them the reason that your country is in a mess is because of the British.
Mohammed, I do understand where we started with this, and I've had this debate with callers in the past, and you know, I have studied this a little bit, and I get that the later bits of the Quran are pretty insightful in many ways, but equally you could argue there are parts of the Old Testament that actually say things about homosexuals, etc., that we might find very difficult to live with, well, impossible to live with under the law today. Interesting. But Mohammed, let me just ask you something. You clearly believe that the teachings of this book are bad and wrong, and you've turned away from it. And yet, am I not right in saying that the vast majority of people of practicing Muslim faith living in Britain today are peaceful and want to be British and part of our community?
I will agree with you on the first point. A majority of them are peaceful because they do not strictly follow, their prophet. Now, when you speak about Britishness, they are not the British. They swear their allegiance to the country where their parents are from. They're not proud to be British. When we went into war with Argentina and a British ship was attacked and sunk, my community was cheering.
This was, I mean, famously in the 1980s, and it provoked a huge uproar. Norman Tebbit called this the cricket test, didn't he? That you've come to this country, you've settled here, you may have taken nationality, but who do you support when England plays a team from the subcontinent at cricket? And what you're saying, Mohammed, is that peaceful and non-peaceful actually owe their allegiance to the countries of their birth or their parents' birth rather than this country.
Absolutely. Can I also say, here's an interesting point, right? There are approximately 85 Islamic people staying in Manchester. Now, they had a vigil, right, yesterday. I hardly saw anybody from my community there. And that speaks a lot. And not only that, right, extremism at all levels has to be tackled, even for us as well, because 3 of my friends were almost killed for turning away from Islam. 8 armed officers eventually had to help a friend of mine from Bradford to leave his home because he was almost killed outside his home.
I do get the point, Mohammed, you make about apostasy, and I understand that if your neighbours, if they were of a more extreme mindset, may well make your life impossible. I understand that. But Mohammed, can I just return, and thank you for saying the things that you've said. Can I just return to the sort of main point of my debate tonight, that we have nearly 3,500 known jihadis in this country who we're scared are potential terrorists. What do you think, Mohammed, the UK authorities should do to them?
Well, I mean, here's a prime example of what happened on a Monday night. The police were alerted on 2 occasions that this man was an extremist. He was dangerous.
I know.
And that just proves a point that the police, the authorities, do not understand the threat.
Mohammed, the fact that the preacher at the mosque and neighbours and other people said this guy was showing some really pretty extreme forms of behaviour, and yet he still wasn't on the list of nearly 3,500, that worries me. But let me ask you again. There are nearly 3,500 people that the authorities in this country think are capable of committing acts of terror. Doesn't mean they all will, but their links and associations and their behaviour and their online activity says they may commit horrendous acts. What do we do, Mohammed? You know, as a decent society that believes in the rule of law, what should we do?
We can either stand idle. The authorities can either stand idle,
or
a parliament can either stand idle and allow another attack to happen, or they can change a law that will make it easier to throw these people out of this country.
All right, Mohammed, listen, I thank you. We've had a very lengthy conversation. I'm fascinated by a lot of what you've got to say. Adam in Reading, what should we do? How do you view these 3,500 known jihadis?
Hi, Nigel. I'm a convert to Islam. I've been a Muslim for 10 years.
Yes.
Massive fan of yours. Thank you for your help in getting us out of the EU. What we should do with these 3,000 is they should be deported. We've got this 0.7 aid budget. What we use the aid budget for is buying up influence in the world. We can say, look, Libya, if you don't take all of these people, all of these extremists, if you don't take them, you're not getting a single penny of aid. And we can use...
I don't think, Adam, that's how David Cameron intended the 0.7% to be used. But Adam, look, if people have come into this country in the last few years from Libya, for argument's sake, and they're not conforming or refusing to get on with our way of life, I would accept we can deport them. But what do you do about someone like Salman Abedi, who is born in Manchester, who has a British passport? Where do you deport him to?
Libya.
but hang on, he's British.
No. But it doesn't matter, Like he's from a Libyan background. They're all Wahhabist, Salafist.
Hang on. We can't just do broad brushstroke. I mean, you're a convert to Islam, and here you are. You're sounding like the English Defence League on this.
Well, this is the thing. If we don't look, okay, all other Muslims are pretty much all right. You're not getting these issues from Sufis and Shiites and moderate Sunnis and stuff. It's all Wahhabis and Salafists. People don't understand this. It's Wahhabis and Salafists every single time. So, it's really simple. We need to start deporting these people. Otherwise, we're going to end up with a frigging race war. I hang out with Muslims all the time. I know the communities. I know how it works out, and I can see where it's heading. All these liberals don't know where it's freaking going.
Right. So Adam, your point is it's certain strands of Islam that we have the problem with. The rest, people like you, we have no problem with at all.
Yeah, exactly. Well, find somebody who isn't a Wahhabist or Salafist that's done any of this. It's always Wahhabist, Salafist.
Well, Adam, I'm going to use that. I'm going to use that sentence. I'm not going to say anything myself. Adam has challenged you there. Can somebody please answer that question? If you're not a Wahhabist or a Salafist, do you pose any threat to this country at all? Adam, thank you. So, if Abedi had become a threat to this country, what on earth should we do with the 3,500 known jihadis in the UK already? Right now, you're listening to the Nigel Farage Show, exclusively on LBC. It's 7:16. I tried last night, in the light of the absolute horror from Manchester, to have a show where we'd reach some positive conclusions about how we could stop radicalisation happening in our schools and prisons elsewhere. And we took some advice from President Trump's advisor on these things as to how they're dealing with it in America. But I want to say something tonight that maybe is a little bit depressing. I've said already that there are nearly 3,500 known jihadists, people on a suspect terror list in the UK already. Andrew Parker, who's the Director General of MI5, said there are at least 3,000 committed jihadists in the country, and they are just the ones we know about. The real number could be anything between 6,000 and 10,000. Now, clearly, Salman Abedi was one of those, wasn't he? He wasn't. He's not included in a list that was considered to be absolutely hardcore, and just as worrying that it is known that at least 400 people have gone from the UK to Syria to fight from ISIS. Now, I say 400. Some reports say it could be 400 from Manchester alone. I don't know, but I'll stick with a lower figure. But of the hundreds that have gone to Syria and returned to the UK, only 54 have been prosecuted and a further 30 are facing charges. And there's one person that I really do want to direct a simple question to. She was the longest-serving Home Secretary for 150 years. Her name is Theresa May, and I want to know, why did we not either take the passports away from these 3,500 people, or take their passports away when they attempted to get back into the country? What have we done? I want to know this. What have we done to stop people who've been and fought in brutal war zones, who've learnt how to make bombs? What have we done to stop them coming back into our communities? Because from what I can see, it is very little indeed. I get on text, Nigel, great to listen to your show. I believe the 3,500 people need to be incarcerated or deported immediately. It can and should be done. We had some of that last night as well. I also get certain states in Germany are deporting people and go back 2 generations to their grandparents' countries. If they can, why can't we? Asks Anne in Basingstoke. Yeah, Anne, I heard the Merkel government saying this. There's an election coming up, Anne. They're not actually doing it. They let in over 1 million people in 1 year, and as a means of trying to quieten down a public that are angry with them, they said this is what they do. They're not actually doing it. Nigel, the reality that is very concerning is these perpetrators are now second generation or more. The only way is to adopt a more Australian approach, says David in Birmingham. Well, the Australian approach, David, would be you're careful about who comes in. And it is worth noting, it really is worth noting, that Abedi's parents came to the United Kingdom as opponents of Gaddafi, claiming political refuge. Was the reason they claimed political refuge that they were, in fact, jihadi extremists? I don't yet quite know the answer to that question. But if indeed the reason they claim refugee status here is because they were extreme jihadists, and that actually Gaddafi, whatever his faults may have been, was trying to run a secular country, I would then suggest we got to rethink our refugee policy in its entirety. Now, please, anybody out there with any knowledge of what was happening 20, 25 years ago in terms of refugee policy, come and tell me that I'm wrong. I'm not convinced I'm right, but you know what? I may be. Leon in Brighton. I'm being told by some people, Leon, that we should round everybody up and put them in internment camps. And I'm really worried that if we do that, it's shades of the 1930s, or even actually shades of what we did in Northern Ireland from time to time, to make the situation, as I see it, worse, not better. Leon, what do you think?
It's a bit high, Nick, first of all. Sorry, Nick, totally forgive me. Yeah, the bottom line is this. Look, I'll be honest about it. Everybody's talking about, what we're seeing and what's going on, and it's hideous, it's awful, it's terrible. My heart bleeds for all the families, for everybody that's lost somebody, but there is a solution here that nobody really seems to be talking about.
Will you tell us what it is, please?
I'm going to share it with everybody, and I'll tell you what it is. We need to look to, I'm probably pronouncing it wrong, but reformation. There needs to be reform within the Quran itself. Now, to be honest with you, there are a couple of leading political activists, one by the name of Herbst Ali.
I know. Yeah.
These are Muslim women, and they are speaking out about various aspects of Islam at the moment and what needs to change within it. To me, I'm looking at it in very simple terms. Of course, it wouldn't be simple to implement it, or even to get the Saudis, because they have founders' privilege, to actually agree to reinterpret the whole area of martyrdom, in the Quran. But if that's taken out, then there's no actual justification for committing murder in the name of the faith.
So we need to have a reformation that takes place within the religion of Islam. That would need, Leon, the leaders of all the different strains of Islam to accept there was a problem and to have a sort of international conference to do it. I actually think you're right in many, many ways. I think you are right. But a previous caller made the point that the Wahhabis and the Salafists are the real problem. Would they agree to do this?
Well, probably not. I mean, looking at the ideology they're following at the moment, there's no two ways about it. They won't. The bottom line is, and this is something that a lot of Muslims will agree with, is that they believe that, their doctrine is the final word of God. Now, I don't want to get sort of too much into the history. Islam evolved. The whole Quran sort of evolved over a period of a couple of 100 years. Now, the fact is, Sunnahs were what became sort of the doctrine of the Quran itself. And there was debate amongst the elders at the time about which sunnahs should effectively be in the Quran and those that shouldn't. Now, there shouldn't be any debate about that if that's the final word.
Well, Leon, you're right. There are lots of strains. I mean, I know the Ahmadiyya Muslims in the United Kingdom very, very well. They've been to visit me in Brussels. I've been to visit them here. And they are absolutely pro-integrationist and pose absolutely no threat to this country at all, and they're friends of mine. Leon, it's complex because there are so many different strains of Islam. But your basic point that the religion needs to have a reformation, needs to have a public debate with itself about what's going wrong, I completely understand and take. Mahmood in Putney, what on earth do we do with these nearly 3,500 people?
Well, I think that if the due process, if they're subject to the due process of law, then if they're demonstrated to be a threat to the country, then absolutely they should be deported. I just wanted to say there's a previous caller, Muhammad, who said that he was a Christian, converted from this dreadful religion, Islam. And he made all sorts of comments about Islam that weren't really challenged properly. I'm a member of the Ahmadiyya Muslim community.
Are you? Okay. Well, I've literally just mentioned.
You mentioned it. I know. Yeah, I heard.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah. I mean, the thing, what I would say is, you talk about reformation within Islam. I mean, that's something that has already happened. I mean, and when you say reformation, when Muhammad came, I mean, this idea that somehow, he came with the sword and, there was two phases to his life, one when he was peaceful and the other when he was warlike, is absolute tosh. And this idea that peace isn't mentioned in the Quran, well, Islam actually means peace, as your listeners well know. But the thing is that what's happened actually is that these Wahhabists that you're talking about, and these terrorists, they've taken certain verses of the Quran completely out of context, and those verses that relate to war only relate to defensive war. And they've taken them in a completely different context, and they're abetted by certain people who are Christians and whatever, who want to attack the religion.
You are not the first person to tell me that these are wild misinterpretations, that what was seen to be defensive is taken to be offensive. I've heard this before. But would you not accept there must be a problem within the religion if certain people choose to take that interpretation?
Well, I would say that there's a problem with the adherents of the religion, not the religion itself.
Okay.
I mean, because what I would say to you is, I mean, if you look back to Islam in Spain, Islam reached the shores of Europe in Spain, and that was a beacon of light for the entirety of Europe, which led to the Reformation and the Renaissance in Europe. When Europe was in the Dark Ages. So Islam, is a force for good and for knowledge and for enlightenment. Yeah. But unfortunately, it's going through a medieval phase in certain parts of the world, like Saudi Arabia. All countries that are supported by us, as in terms of arms deals and all sorts of things. We support the Saudis.
I know. Just tell me, because I know the Ahmadiyyas. Let's just cheer a few people up who are listening to this and feeling very depressed. Just tell me that as a Muslim, you are committed to integration, to being British, and to driving out the bad guys.
Well, more than that, we want to make a positive contribution to any country in which we settle, and we abhor these acts of terror, and we want to actually be the agents for change, so that within the religion we actually provide the theological arguments against these people.
I love it.
We're the only people
Mahmood, that's the best phone call I possibly could have had. Thank you. You're listening to the Nigel Farage Show, exclusively on LBC. It's 7:30. This bomber, this monster, this loser, as President Trump called him. And actually, no, tell you what, let's keep using the word loser, because that's what these people are. He was known to the authorities. He had worried people at the Didsbury Mosque. He'd worried his neighbours. And yet, despite many of the things he said, he still wasn't on the list of nearly 3,500 people who are suspected jihadi terrorists in this country. And I'm asking you, what on earth should we do with them? And Mariana says to me on Facebook, anyone on a watch list for terrorism who goes to Syria to a training camp is not going on holiday. These people should have their passports confiscated on re-entry back into Britain. Mariana, I agree entirely. I also get David Essex says, anyone, regardless of religion, who breaks the law should feel the full weight of it, including internment, with reasonable proof. Similarly, anyone, regardless of religion, who does break the law, who deserves its protection. Yeah, Dave, that's fine. But is internment the way forward? And I'm just thinking historically, and by the way, I'm not drawing any direct comparisons between Irish nationalism 100 years ago and extreme jihadism today. But isn't it interesting that in 1916 we get the Dublin Uprising? We get nationalists in Ireland who want Ireland to break away from Great Britain as it then was. And there's an uprising. What's interesting is they only had minority support in the island of Ireland. And yet, what did the Brits do? What did the British government do in response? We executed half a dozen of them, which began to turn people against us. And we then took 300 of the people who'd been most actively involved, and we sent them, we deported them, we interned them in a sort of couple of fields in Wales. And we chucked them all there together, and they were there together for 2 or 3 years. And when they came back to Ireland, they were far more extreme in their Irish nationalism than they'd ever been. And they came back into... They were fanatics by the time they came back. And they came back into an environment that the British had made worse by executing some of the ringleaders rather than showing clemency. And you know what really worries me, folks? Look, I have been warning for 10 years that we're making horrendous mistakes in terms of our gutlessness, in facing up to the mistakes of multiculturalism, in not vetting properly people who come into Britain. And I'm seen, I guess, by many in Westminster as a hardliner on this. But the last thing we should do is round up 3,500 people and put them in some internment camp somewhere. Because you know what? If we do that, we will turn hundreds of thousands of law-abiding Muslims in Britain onto the side of the bad guys. And that is really what I believe. Sure, we've got to monitor them. Certainly, we should stop anybody who's been to Syria. Just take their passports away. Get rid of them. I agree with that entirely. But I worry that this idea that we round everybody up actually will make the problem worse. That's how I feel. Please, anyone... if you agree with me or disagree with me, it's 0345 6060 973. I'm going next to Zach in Halifax. Zach, good evening. What on earth do we do, Zach, with nearly 3,500 people who pose this threat to us?
Do you know what? I disagree. I think we need to lock them up.
Do you? Okay.
Yes. I'm a proud British Muslim. I voted Brexit. I like some of the things, but I do think some people should back off the whole Muslim thing. We're normal. We're just like you, and we kind of go to work and do our things and enjoy things. But these are idiots. You know, these people. If they don't like this country, they need to be locked away.
But Zach, you know, you're a British Muslim, and you've said all the things you've said. But these people who are committing these acts of horror believe they're doing it in the name of Islam, Zach.
They're not doing it in the name.
But they believe they are.
Do you know what you said? Hundreds of thousands of Muslims will not turn against this country. They'll actually support you. They'll say no, because you know the communities are fed up of it. We're fed up of it. There's a word we say, badnami. It's the shame and the things that these guys are doing. I mean, you had a caller before who was talking about the Salafis and the Wahhabis.
Yes.
This guy wasn't a Wahhabi or Salafi. He was a pothead. He was.
Do you know what, Zach? What is really, I'm pleased you've raised that. There's virtually no one that's been involved in suicide bombings or terror attacks in Europe over the last few years that has not had a habitual drug use problem.
There's one more thing I'd like to say. My son's Arabic Quran teacher. He's a prison imam, and he was part of the sort of counter-extremism project, so basically a de-radicalization project. And they would sit down, and he's a very, very learned man, and he'd sit down with them, because what these guys do, they'll take a little bit and take it out of context, and then they'll use that and they'll believe in that. A sentence that's half a sentence without the paragraph, and they'll stick by that. And people like him would then bring him and basically say to them, look, this is. They'll argue them, and they'll make them see sense. And guess what happened? The government cut all the funding for this. So the problems that you have problems in prisons where they need to fix.
I mean, isn't Zach one of the questions here? Did Mrs. May, as Home Secretary, during this period in which this deteriorated, did she do enough?
I don't think she did.
Well, nor do I. Because whenever she's questioned on this, she said, but I was the Home Secretary who deported Abu Hamza. But it took us 10 years to get rid of him.
If someone goes to Syria, wants to fight in Syria, personally, I think we should strip them off their citizenship. Even if they're born here, get lost, don't come back. We don't want them in this country. I don't want them in this country. And
she didn't do... Zach, I tell you what, I bet you, if we conducted an opinion poll on that basic question, we'd get monster support. We'd get 80% support, maybe even more, and yet Mrs. May didn't do it. So, Zach, just to repeat, you think we should round up these 3,500 people and get them off our streets?
Yes, because you know what? It's disgusting. And if they want to fight, go to Syria. Leave, go, get out of the country, but don't attack innocents here.
Zach, your position is clear. Why do some strands of your religion interpret the Quran and behave in this way?
You have idiots in every religion.
Losers, as Trump would call them.
Losers. And unfortunately, these people that you can't. They're what can I say? I'm not allowed to swear on the radio, so I won't swear on the radio. But they're ignorant. My wife, she wears a headscarf. She's a doctor.
Okay, yeah, yeah.
She thinks the same as me.
They're ignorant, but they're dangerous. Zach, you're a star. Thank you. You made some really interesting points. I'm going to go to Naveen in Croydon. Good evening.
Good evening, Nigel. Never thought I'd have to speak with you, but I need to today.
Please do.
To you, to everyone that follows your ethos, and to every Muslim out there. I'm a very proud British Asian Muslim.
Yes.
And there's a few points I'd like to make. Firstly, that point that you were saying to the last caller, I have to mention that in the Quran, and every single person who has put a hate tweet after Manchester, those poor parents, that has said ever in their life that these Muslims are killers, I want you to put your arrogance and your ignorance to one side. I want your integrity to listen today. In the Quran, repeatedly, it says you kill one innocent human, you kill the whole of humanity. It says that repeatedly.
That's in the earlier parts of the Quran, isn't it, as opposed to the later parts of the Quran?
In the Quran, they put up quotes saying, kill infidel, kill this. They forget to put that this is recitations of past wars that have happened when Islam was being persecuted for being spread. Now, that's one thing, whether you wish to accept that or not. You've had people like Jonathan Ross on his show saying, I've read that book cover to cover. It's the most peaceful book you can ever read. Now, today's time, okay? So I just want everybody to put ignorance aside, and there.
Well, I tell you what, Naveen, there are lots and lots of people that want to get their comments on this show, and you just raised a very, very big point. So let's just deal with that. Of course, there are different interpretations of all religious documents, and that's been the case forever. But you have very passionately made your point that you see the Quran, you see the religion as being for peace, and you believe that very strongly and very passionately. Let me ask you, why is it then that some people who are adherents to your religion choose to take a completely different interpretation and threaten our way of life?
I tell you why. Okay, 2 points. First, if you pulled up one of those IS militants or any of those 3.5 jihadis, and you're saying 3.5, and I'll give you some statistics, okay, because I'm a former crime scene examiner for the Met Police.
Yep.
Now, firstly, I defy anyone to pull up one of those IS militants. I defy any of these jihadis to be pulled up. Other than Allahu Akbar, you ask them to recite one prayer, one translation of the Quran, they will not be able to do it.
Now, that may be right, but why, Naveen, why are they committing barbarity in the name of this religion? Why are they doing it?
I'll tell you why. Because the Quran is the only religion. You know, you say these interpretations. That's not true, because the Quran is the only holy scripture that has never had a single word changed. And Muslims are very passionate about that. Now, when you take a religion like that, and this was my point to you, to everyone that follows you, and to every Muslim, and I have said this on BBC Radio, on any Twitter, anywhere I can find, any platform. The day the word Islamist was added to Islamist IS, to Islamic State, we should have stood up. You know, when you got to say, why do you not integrate? We should have stood up and said, how dare you use that word? Change it to Daesh. I have asked this. Muslims should have stood up and said, do not hijack our religion. This is not Islam.
Well, actually, Naveen, isn't that what Donald Trump was saying in Riyadh? Isn't that exactly what he said? Because there were 50 of the biggest leaders of the Muslim world in that room, and what Trump was saying was, isn't it time you, Naveen, Donald Trump and others work together to drive out the extremists? Isn't that what we need to do?
I will tell you where this driving out comes from. Having been a crime scene examiner for the Met Police, the amount of cuts in the last 6 years that have come in with forensic evidence is not admissible because of budget cuts. You've got intelligence sitting there that can't be investigated, that can't be analysed because of budget cuts.
Well, now that's a slightly separate issue, but don't worry, Naveen, they brought the army in now, so all's going to be well. Listen, fascinating conversation. You're listening to the Nigel Farage Show here on LBC. It's 7:48. The Manchester loser, Salman Abedi, who killed those people, was known to have voiced extreme views, was known to have praised people who were suicide bombers, and yet despite all of this, he wasn't even on the list. The nearly 3,500 people that the authorities know are a serious terrorist threat in this country. And I'm asking you, what should we do with them? And views vary, but quite a few of you over the last couple of days are saying we should intern them, we should lock them all up. And I'm worried about that. And I wonder whether actually legally we can do that. Anna in Leicester, what do you think we should do?
Hi, Nigel. Great to talk to you.
Good evening.
I'm a human rights master's student, and the idea of sending them back, locking them up, taking out their passports is ridiculous. And it's not a country we want to live in, that we would be proud to live in. We mock countries that behave this way, and it's just outrageous. And listening to your previous callers, listening to Muslims having to justify themselves is a joke. It's like making men justify themselves for all the rapists in the world.
Yeah, no, I understand that. And it's interesting. You're studying human rights. I
am.
Is the reason, and I'm not saying we should deport people, and I'm not saying we should intern people, but is the reason that we really can't do it because of European human rights legislation?
Partly, but another part of it is that the focus should be on focusing on eliminating segregation, integrating people. Everybody has a freedom to their conscious freedom of thought and religion. We just have to respect that. And as long as they're not doing anything illegal, there's nothing we can do with them.
But whether European human rights make us a better world or not, they certainly restrict the power of government, don't they? Because when Theresa May was Home Secretary and attempting to deport Abu Hamza because of him constantly claiming various articles of human rights, it took 10 years to get rid of him. And if we're facing, I mean, let's just say, Anna, for argument's sake, and I hope I'm wrong, let's just say this situation deteriorated and got worse, and the government wanted to invoke emergency powers. Now, I'd be nervous about it, but supposing they wanted to do it, they couldn't do it, could they, as part of the European Convention on Human Rights?
No, they couldn't, but that's not a bad thing, because as soon as you start letting them do that, you have the government throwing people into jail for no reason, torture, no trials. That's not the kind of country we want to live in, where people disappear.
No, I understand the argument for, but what's interesting, Anna, is this. Theresa May, as Home Secretary, said we must withdraw from the European Convention on Human Rights, and now she's U-turned in the manifesto and says we're going to stay part of it until at least 2025. Can you be a tough Home Secretary and maintain the European Convention on Human Rights, for good or bad?
Yes, you can. You can.
So you would say... No. Listen, I'm not knocking your arguments. I'm just teasing them out. So you're saying that what we do with the 3,500 is we carry on, as we've always done, and we say they are innocent until they do something wrong and make themselves guilty.
We do, and we also believe in the forces and the intelligence of our country, which is fantastic.
OK. Anna, thank you very much indeed. David on Facebook says you can remove those 3,000 jihadists, but another 3,000 will replace them. Remove those and you'll have 3,000 more. Oh, David, you're being negative, but maybe you're backing up my point that if we go for internment, we'll find ourselves with a lot more radical jihadists than we actually started with. And I'm thinking probably the last call of the evening is Martin from Anglesey. What do we do with these people, Martin?
Hello, Nigel. Good evening.
Good evening.
I have to sort of put my politics out front before I start. I have to say I don't agree with everything that Nigel Farage stands for.
Well, no one does. It's okay.
But I do think Nigel Farage speaks an awful lot of common sense, and I think that's one of the qualities that's missing in politics in the UK at the moment is common sense. And there are supposedly 3,000 of these people, 3,500. I wouldn't know what the number is.
Sure.
Sounds like a very, very big number to me. What I'd suggest is there's probably, 100, maybe 200 of these 3,500 people who I would regard as Premier League. Yeah? They're the people...
But how do you know, Martin? How do you know it's not...
How do I know? I don't know.
But let's suppose it's 10 times that number.
But 10 times that number is 2,000.
Yep.
Right. What I'm saying is, of the 3,500, there's probably an awful lot of those people who are just idiots. They're people who've gone onto websites and looked at the wrong thing, and that, with GCHQ having the capabilities it's got, it's pinged up a word in GCHQ, and all of a sudden they're on somebody's radar. What I'm talking about is the type of person who is really on their radar, the sort of person that is...
All right, so Martin...
Masses of MI5...
Martin, time's running out. So let's say there's a couple of hundred real baddies. What do we do?
I'll tell you what we do. We get the boys in blue and the anti-terrorist guys tonight, and we go and round them up, Nigel.
Martin, you've made the point.
Strong message.
Martin,
we are not going to put up with it.
You've made the point. Round them up, says Martin at Anglesey. That's the real bad guys. Now, I've had a bit of a go at the Prime Minister tonight. I feel as Home Secretary she did little or nothing. I feel the fact that she wants to keep us in the European Convention on Human Rights will limit her ability. But in the interest of balance, the Prime Minister today has said that the work undertaken throughout the day has revealed that it is a possibility that we cannot ignore that there is a wider group of individuals linked to this attack. As a result of the decision, the police have asked for authorization from the Secretary of State for Defence to deploy a number of armed military personnel in support of their armed officers. You might also see military personnel deployed at certain events, such as concerts, sports matches, and helping the police to keep the public safe. So there we are. It's all going to be okay. You've been listening to the Nigel Farage Show on LBC. I'm back tomorrow evening from 7. Coming up at 10, it's Ian Collins, but up next, it's Clive Bull.
Nigel, thank you, and we'll continue this conversation as the terror threat level is raised to critical and troops are deployed. Do you feel this is a response that